Hi, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity from Adjust to speak here today. Is my slide up there? Oh. Big green? Oh. Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry. Sorry. I'm not a tech guy, obviously. Yeah. So my talk today is really about how we at Smule solve the problem of having too much data, but not the right data, or not the data that's not integrated correctly. It's a massive problem. So even though more and more data is available to you every day, it's not always in a usable form, and we spend a lot of time reconciling why we get two different numbers from two different systems. So to me, the problem is one of data integration. And I'm going to go through some ways that we've leveraged the Adjust data platform. That's how I see it. I mean, I don't see it as an attribution system. I see it as a system to connect other things together. I think it's really fantastically engineered. I wish our own event instrumentation system at Smule worked the same way. But you can use it in some creative ways to help you get better, more accurate data and to make decisions more quickly. So Smule, just quickly, is a company. We've been around 10 years. We make music apps. Our goal is to connect people through music, and that's through the creation of music and consumption. We actually want to go back to a time when people participated in music more, not just to consume it because you have it anywhere, anytime nowadays. We actually want to enhance the ways that people can participate in creating music. So that's our goal. We have a series of apps, and I've been there 6 years. I love working there. I've had, as you heard, jobs where I haven't really thought that we're doing no harm, but in this case, we don't do any harm. We just do good. So it makes me happy to go to work every day. So back to the theme or the title. Does anybody know this? The Ancient Mariner, Tale of the Ancient Mariner, Coleridge, late 1700s English poet, but he wrote this tale about, it's about superstition amongst other things, but the ship is pursued by an albatross and there's fog everywhere, they can't see anything. And so he shoots the albatross and everybody's happy because the fog clears. And then a few days later, you know, they're plunged into the doldrums and they're surrounded by water that they can't drink. And so the analogy here is they're surrounded by something they can't use. And I think that a lot of times, even with all this data, we end up in the same situation. We're no clearer in finding the answers we're looking for. And I wanted to say something quickly about our UA team, who sometimes look like that at the end of the day. They work very hard, and my communication with them every day is usually, when can we have the data? When can we have the data? And so let me talk about a little bit about the problem first, about this disunion of data. And it's sort of a growing problem, especially if you have a machine learning or data science team who tend to use their own ways of getting data. So rather than this problem going away, it's actually getting worse, in my opinion. So this is just to show that we have stovepipe data, that we have data that's disparate and just not integrated. And that causes all kinds of issues. So data science, this is a picture. It's a great image, actually. It was from the New York Times, but it was a story earlier this year about how the top data scientists are making 8-figure salaries. I had to think about that. 8-figure salaries, and they gave some examples. And the article went on to say that at the top of this field, there's only about 10,000 qualified people. So it's a huge expense for companies, but everybody's pursuing it, and rightly so, because it will solve a lot of problems. But do you know, I mean, does anybody know what data scientists spend 80% of their time doing? I mean, they don't, I mean, I don't know if this is true everywhere. Exactly. I mean, they don't analyze the data that they're there. Their algorithms are great, but the 80% of their time is spent cleaning data. So to me, the problem is one of data integration. And not just in data science, but everywhere, is you want to integrate that data so it's more meaningful. In fact, Michael Stonebreaker, who may not be familiar if you're not a techie, but he won the Turing Award, which is computer industry's most prestigious award. He's worked with databases since the early 80s, I think, when he created Ingress. But in his speech earlier this year, I think at Stanford, he said that the high pole in the tent is data integration. You have to solve that problem, and nobody's doing it, or not enough people are doing it. So with that, I just want to say how we're using, show some ways that we're using Adjust to integrate data. So just as a quick diagram of how integration works for us, I mean, how many people, by the way, are using real-time callbacks? A few, one or two, not too many. Well, it's great, you should use it. It helps a lot. So there's two ways, really. Either through the SDK and APIs back to your app, you're going to get data. Or through the real-time callbacks, you can get data direct to your server platform. And you can also send server events, which we've done. So there's other ways to leverage this. And again, I think the point is, at least the way I look at it, is Adjust is a data platform. And you shouldn't think of it just as attribution, and there are many ways you can use it to connect things together. So there's sort of three areas where we've leveraged Adjust. There's the core UA work where we've instrumented dashboards and so on that give the UA team real-time data. So I'll show that a little bit. And so they become much more self-sufficient. They don't rely on me anymore as much to give them data. They can look at it themselves. There's the core, really, of what I want to talk about is how we integrate and enhance our own BI systems. And then finally, data quality, which is an important factor too. So the self-sufficiency thing, you know, we instrumented, we take the data pipeline from Adjust, which is very easy to turn on with a global callback. You get your ops team to create an endpoint, and that data just starts flowing. And UA teams can just turn it on and off whenever they want. They can add events. And it's super easy to set up. And now that we have that, the UA team actually has their own Tableau desktop versions. They create their own dashboards. They have their own project on the server, and they can look at all that data. And we added it sort of as a side thing because at that point it's really not integrated, but still it's become something that they rely on. And I would say it's the thing they care most about now if it's not working, because within a few minutes they can see how their campaigns are doing. So that's one aspect, I think, that UA now doesn't rely on data so much. They can start to take a look earlier on. Probably the biggest sort of form of integration I imagine most of you do is, you know, you're working on a device ID level, but your systems internally are almost certainly going to have an account or a user ID. And so you have to, and particularly for us, we've been around for 10 years, as I say, we have many apps. We want to have all those apps, all those devices roll up under one user so that we can model LTV on the user level when they first became a Smule customer. And you know, with device IDs changing all the time, IDFAs being, you know, I think it's like 18% of IDFAs are nulled out now. You don't see them. It's important to have a system where you trust the unique identifier. In Adjust case, they have this thing called the Adjust ID, which we use as the persistent ID on that device. And many times we see people uninstall, reinstalling, and our counts internally are off. They can be massively off in certain regions where people are trying to game the system. So this has become our trusted source of device information, which we then integrate with our own user and account model across all apps so that we have a user view of the data. You can't see this all, but this is architecture diagram. Sorry, don't worry. It was, so this is actually, well, I'll leave it up there, even if you can't read it. But the point is, we have about 2 billion events a day. And since we stream music, it's important for us to know when we're having failures in the streams. And that can be for a number of reasons. It can happen on certain Android devices that don't have the correct video and audio codecs. It can happen because it's a carrier who's limiting bandwidth. It can happen for a number of reasons. So we really need to know in a session whether that person is connected through DSL, through cellular, what the carrier code is, what ASN number they're on, all kinds of things. And when we went to our internal department to say, hey, rather than just getting that geo and IP and carrier data once a session, we need it on every event, because we need to know what the source of that problem is and address it. So they said, well, that's a scalability problem. We can't do that for 2 billion events. We're not going to do it. And so what we did is on the client over here on the right, through the Adjust SDK, we send events through Adjust, and we put on there a unique ID, and we send that ID in both to our internal system and through the Adjust using the custom fields, dynamic callback parameters. So that allows us to match data on the back end. And then what we do for all those events that fall within a 10-second range, we can then basically interpolate and assign the IP information, the geo, the carrier information. And so that way, we can troubleshoot much more quickly when we see events. Like some of the events, we send a custom event will be a song download failure that we see. So we'll send that through Adjust. And now we can instrument the whole session on our own data using what we've leveraged from Adjust. And in fact, they have very good geodata. They use MaxMind, I think. And so that data is updated daily. Our own internal geo IP data we update once a month. So it's a valuable source of data to enhance what you already have and enrich. So, and this is a way that we save money internally and actually got better data because their carrier information is a bit more accurate than ours. One thing that we also found, if you look up in the top left corner there, we wanted to check that we were getting all these events that we sent through both pipelines. And in fact, in some cases, we were seeing up to 4% more events coming through Adjust than we saw through our own pipeline. So we probably have some network connectivity issues that the SDK isn't faced with, either because of network or whatever. Sometimes it's hacking, what have you. But so that's important for us to monitor. The other thing over here on the right, in terms of how real-time is real-time, well, our own systems, you can't really see it exactly, but the median second delay for events for our own systems is around 17 seconds, and for Adjust, it's about 32 seconds. So it's not a huge difference. We can certainly live with that. In other words, we're getting events from Adjust just 15 seconds or so after we get it in our own system. So also, I should point out on the bottom right that there are certain times of day where the delay spikes. It depends around. This was one particular day. It may not be the pattern every day. So the point here is your data quality is something that you can leverage Adjust to check on. This is a common one. We use Adjust fraud filter, but that system, rightly so, is very deterministic. And sometimes you'll see patterns in the data that look like something, but you can't actually say for sure it's fraud. But here's an example that we had from a couple of years ago. You can see that, and the point is here that you should, on those callbacks, use all the timestamps you can get. You can get the click time, impression time, install time. I think, I don't know, there's like 5 or 6 timestamps. But if you plot a distribution of the time to install, the time between click and install, you see on the bottom there the pattern for most networks, which is pretty normal. The top chart there is one single network that doesn't follow that pattern. Their time to install is grouped around 2 seconds, which seems unlikely. I mean, there are cases when it can be that way because of server-to-server clicks and so on. But anyway, having this data means that you can spot patterns to enhance what you're already getting through the fraud detection system and adjust. And so that time to install is a useful metric. The other thing that we're doing a lot now is we're trying to integrate our CRM system, which may or may not have device IDs, but we use the dynamic callback parameters to send our account IDs through that system. And then we can register clicks, impressions, what have you, through adjust system, and then later match it up to session data we see for that same account, and actually then even attribute the device IDs back to that CRM system if they're reinstalling. So that's something that we've started to explore a lot, particularly with push campaigns through deep linking. And so it's beginning to work well for us. This is actually something we're working on right now. You get a lot of data, so don't waste it. And in particular, for paid channels, what you get when you spend money on Facebook or elsewhere is they already know better than you do things about your users. So you should use that. So if you know, for example, gender, age, pass those attributes back through the real-time callback to through a naming convention or what have you. But then you can put those as attributes in your database. I mean, I would trust that Facebook does a pretty good job of figuring out gender and age. And the important thing about getting that real time is that if you have a recommender system, on day one, everybody has it, or most companies are going to have content that they want to show that's relevant, and you don't know anything about that user on day one, except your ad system knows it. So don't throw it away. Use it, and then within 30 seconds or so, let's say they're doing an install, they've gone through onboarding, you can then send that data to your recommender system to bring in content that is a lot more relevant than you were able to tell without that ad. Obviously, for organic, you're not going to know that much, but for a paid install, that's useful data. I mean, you should use it, and the real-time nature is key there. So what we're trying to do in 2019 is build a more multi-touch and incremental model. So through integrating CRM and other marketing channels, we want to record every touch point at the user level, not the device level, so that we can build a better LTV model and attribute revenue to the cost to a touch point, or however we decide. But we need the data in order to do that. And what we find is, particularly because we've been around a long time and people replace devices every 2 years and we come out with new apps, that model, the incremental cost is something that we don't track very well right now. And through doing this and integrating data, we think we're going to get a better model and a better understanding of long-term value, lifetime value. So this slide is just something I want to, this is more process and what I've found at Smule. Maybe if you're in smaller companies, it's not an issue, but mobile developers, they don't like SDKs. They didn't write the code. They don't want to use it. And we've been burned in the past by bad SDKs that have caused timeouts, and they've caused the app launch time to increase. And so we're leery. We have a checklist, and we say, and it's difficult to get them to agree to do it. So, but I want to say that when I talked to one of our mobile engineers, he's been there 10 years. He's a great iOS developer. And I told him, oh, we want to do this SDK upgrade for Adjust. And you know, he sort of turned his nose up. But then he looked at the documentation, and I said, what do you think of the documentation? He said, it's insanely good. And I said, so he loved it right away. And once you get engineers talking to engineers, the resistance drops. And now you build some trust, and there's less resistance to upgrade. And so that's important, because if you don't do that, it's always the bottom of the stack that your SDK upgrade is going to actually get done. In conjunction with that, I imagine in a lot of companies, what happens is product drives the roadmap. And so if you're marketing, your SDK upgrade, you know, maybe it's going to be bottom of the heap. So you have to build an ROI case. it's important to try and build that because you do get a lot of value through the data, and you should build that into your RI case. The other thing is SDKs changing all the time. I go back and look at the notes, and they've added all this stuff like the uninstall tracking, the reattribution click for deep linking, all these things, and you've got to keep up to date with that. They move fast, and if possible, you should try and get your engineering team to just point to the new SDK version when they're building the app, in integration anyway. I mean, most of the time it's not going to do anything unless you use those new features. But we're pretty cautious, and I think it's a question of trust, and you really want to build that trust so you can leverage the new things that get added on a regular basis. One other thing, just on an engineering side, we actually instrumented a listener on the app that can send events internally or through Adjust, and we could just pick and choose which events we want to send each way. So we make a lot of use of the custom events, in-app events. That's been good for us, and the dynamic callback parameters, so we can pass a bunch of attributes, so that when we match that device to an account, it's much easier for us to do that when it comes back into the callback. The other thing I would say is dynamic callback parameters can be valuable for linking systems together. We use it quite a bit now, and it's turned out to be very useful for us. And if you do those things, I think you end up with water that's drinkable, data that's usable. And that's all I have.